Rand Swiss chief economist Viv Govender is in our studio to help forecast what is likely to come out of tomorrow's budget statement. Viv, thank you so much for joining us. Now, there's been a lot of voices coming out and calls for President Ramaphosa to remove the finance minister Moodys from doing the budget speech tomorrow. What's your take on that, and why do you think there's been that call, and why do you think President Ramaphosa has decided to continue with Finance Minister Moodys?
Because it's going to be not a fun thing to do tomorrow. So I don't think anyone's volunteering to do tomorrow's budget speech, you know what I mean? Maybe after the budget they want to come in and like try and do something because they have no input. They'll just come out and read something that somebody else prepared. They would have no input. It was done, you know, months ago. And why would you want to come in and take all this pain for absolutely no reason? It's going to be a very tough budget, as everyone is being saying. Massive deficit that needs to be closed, tough decisions that need to be made. And why would you come and basically take the blame for somebody else's mistakes or, you know, tough decisions and pain when you can avoid it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months and then, you know, replace him down the line?
Viv, contentious issues. What do you think is going to come out of the budget speech? There's been talk of VAT increases, income tax, the issue of free education. Take us through that process. What are you expecting to come out from the budget speech?
Okay, look, there's a 50+ billion rand hole. That means there's 50+ billion rands we need to basically get either by cutting spending or by raising taxes. The problem with raising taxes is the easy tax to raise is income tax, and that's pretty much close to where the maximum is going to be. You get to about 50% in income tax levels, and what you find is a psychological kind of thing happening where people tend to start having much more volumes in terms of, you know, if you make a rand in whatever business you're doing, and then somebody comes and takes more than 50 cents of the rand away and leave you with 40-something cents, you start thinking, why did I focus on trying to protect my, you know, my stuff from taxes as opposed to trying to earn more money? Because I earn more money more than most of it goes to government. And then those people that come and point out, like the US had a 90% marginal tax rate after World War II. The reason the US had a marginal tax rate of 90% after World War II, or they could do it, is because they bombed the rest of the world to oblivion. Germany doesn't basically exist as a power. Japan hadn't existed as a power. If you were basically a business person or a person making money in the world, you were in the US and you couldn't go much any other place. Right now in South Africa, that's not the case. You can always leave. So people can't, you know, use historical examples that don't quite match us. But you look at other countries that raise taxes, you know, to significant levels, and you find very high earners, very entrepreneurial people then leaving the country. And then comes the idea of what do we do with the new spending coming to play? Like you said, you know, the free education. People say it's going to be, you know, 12, you know, 15 billion, in the first year. That's true, but maybe the second year is going to be the first year plus the second year, so it'll be doubling. Third year is adding another, you know, it's year to it, so you're going to be up to about 50 billion within about 3 or 4 years. That's obviously something that, you know, considering the fact that our budget is under stress at the moment, it's going to be quite difficult to actually manage. Now, what the actual tone of the Ramaphosa presidency is going to be like will be seen from, you know, what I think this budget is going to be, you know, advocating for.
What do you think is the solution in terms with regards to the free education? You touched on something before we went on air.
Yeah, I always thought, I mean, why do the first years free? It doesn't make sense. What if the guys have done second and third years? They're going to just basically have to pay their fees and get out. If you do the third years free, then basically guys that are in the university right now, first, second or third, no, they'll get 1 year at least of free education. Okay, so you're not going to basically exclude guys who have started. You'll know exactly what the numbers are. You're not going to have the situation where the EFF is talking about people that can afford or couldn't afford in the past now enrolling because they would still have to go to the first and second years, and the third year numbers will be more set. And you could basically keep it at third year for a couple of years before expanding it to second year. But if you keep it at, start with the first year, you can't have free education in the first year and then not have free education for those guys who graduate and go to the second year. And then what are you going to do? Not have free education for the first year before, so you're going to have to double the following year and then add another year after that. So it automatically sets you a schedule. It automatically, you know, increases the chance of numbers rising. It causes a whole bunch of issues and also basically disadvantages people that are already in the system at the moment and have passed their first year.
But the big issue, I guess, is the fact that the people that are not in the system and trying to get into the system but are not able to financially, that's where the problem comes into play.
Yeah, but the problem is that what about the people? You see, our people in the system, you really can't change the numbers that dramatically. There's only a certain capacity at these universities to actually handle more numbers. And even if the people had free education, it's not going to change totally who's going to come into the university because there's still other issues involved there. But if you had third year free, at least you can reduce the overall cost of university. Someone that has to plan for 3 years has to plan for only 2 years, and the third year they know will be free. And so that reduces their burden when they get out. There's options out there with regards to loans, etc. And having 1 year off will make it much easier for you to basically service the loans when you graduate.
Now, let's go back to the issue of, we didn't touch on it, but with regards to a cabinet reshuffle, President Ramaphosa touched on the fact that the cabinet is bloated and there is going to be a reduction. Do you think there'll be an impact with regards to financially and you know, a reduction in the money spent by government on the executive? Look,
it's symbolic to say the least. I mean, if you take out even as aggressive as Muslim Money is basically cutting cabinet in half, or the government departments in half, you know, getting down to about 15 or so, you'd be saving about 4 billion. Which is not peanuts. I mean, a billion here, a billion there, and after a time you have some real money. Yeah. Yes, but still, it's compared to the budget deficit, you know, the hole that we have right now, that's unplanned for. It basically is nothing. But it is a good start. I think there's also the case that several ministers, you know, are by most estimates out there, you know, not very good at their jobs, to say the least, or have been compromised by links to, you know, certain nefarious families, let us say. And there's about at least a half a dozen of these people out there that should basically probably be replaced. The market probably on business squinches will probably take it as a positive to see them being replaced by somebody else.
And speaking of provinces, they've already been told that they need to cut down, and you know, where can they make necessary cuts, especially provinces? This is where the crux of the work takes place.
You see, the difficulty at the moment is the fact that, you know, the main expenditure in government is salaries. So we aren't doing infrastructure building, we aren't doing much in terms of actually long-term, you know, investment. We're basically doing consumption, which is basically spending on salaries. And so the salary bill is quite bloated. Unfortunately, what do you do in an economy where you have a 25% effectively unemployment rate? Are you going to fire, you know, tens of thousands of people? Are you going to reduce their salaries? It becomes a very difficult thing to push through politically as well. So, I mean, it has to be something that has to be done, that maybe a hiring freeze or something like that there, but it is a difficult thing for government to actually, you know, contemplate, because these are the most unionized workers in the country, quite frankly, and it's going to be very difficult to actually get, you know, serious, you know, cuts in terms of benefits pushed through in that regard. What's left over in terms of other spending is not as large, and there's certain things that they can't do much about. For instance, welfare spending. I mean, you talk about an old age pensioner. What are they making? Barely over 1,500 rands a month. I mean, how can you justify cutting that by even 10 rands? You know what I mean? Or childcare spending, which is obviously hugely impactful. You don't, you know, have enough food for a child when it's 5 years old. It has a huge impact on healthcare going forward. There's certain things you just can't cut. I mean, there's no humane or rational way to do it, and some things are very politically difficult to cut as well.
Now, should we be worried about interest rate hikes?
Probably unlikely. I mean, the rand is reasonably strong at the moment. The one danger might be a blowout in the oil price. That might be an issue. Luckily, at the moment, the oil price has come down from about $70 a barrel to about 62. That's one thing that's taken a bit of effort off. Of course, another danger, of course, is, you know, more inclement weather that might basically, you know, more drought conditions around the country might have a huge impact on food pricing. But right now, with the rand being stronger, I think the focus on inflation might be going down. The second thing is that without the previous President Zuma in office, it actually makes it much simpler for the Reserve Bank governor to look at the situation in South Africa. With Zuma in office, with the kind of things that were happening on a, you know, monthly or bi-monthly basis, with like Pravin Gordhan being replaced, and, you know, change announcements of like things happening, this is much more erratic. And then for the central bank governor was basically forced to keep interest rates reasonably high to make the market, you know, quiet. But now that we have a replacement, it might be easier for him to cut rates going forward.
Now, just speaking on that, and the issue of, for instance, the nuclear deal, and the finance minister having to touch on that, how do you think he's going to navigate that situation of a nuclear deal?
I think he should come out and say it's off the table. It doesn't make sense. It never made sense I mean, Eskom, one of the issues Eskom had, if you looked at the last results, was the fact that they had a drop in demand for electricity. Why were you looking at, and the nuclear bull deal, the numbers I heard about were talking about something like 20,000 rands per person in this country in extra debt. A huge amount of money, you know, 1 trillion rands almost. So there is no need for it. Obviously, consumption of electricity is very, very you know, fragile at the moment, because the economy isn't growing very fast. Of course, hopefully the economy grows faster going forward, but this is also an area that's open for disruption. We've seen real improvements. I mean, the price of for instance, solar panels has fallen to a fraction of what it was even 5 years ago. It's a huge change in market. So we don't need, or we don't need to basically push through plans that require us to have forecasts of 50 years down the line for these things to be viable, without even knowing what the dominant energy provision methodology will be, say, 10 years from now.
Now, Viv, the issue of ratings agencies, and there's been a lot of positive reception with regards to President Cyril Ramaphosa becoming the president of South Africa. You know, what do you think is likely to happen? There's a lot of political change. Does it impact on ratings agency and the possibility of a downgrade?
Yes, it does. I mean, things like, the nuclear power bill was very negative for the country. If we can change a couple of things, for instance, the main issue that we haven't talked about as well is Eskom, the massive debt to Eskom, hundreds of billions of rands, effectively guaranteed by the government. So if Eskom doesn't pay, the government has to step in. And that is something that I think if they can change the management there to really rectify the issues at Eskom, you could see a huge impact in terms of the fiscal stability of the country. The second thing is that, excluding the Zuma era, South Africa grew in excess of 2% on average per year since the end of apartheid. So we were looking at reasonable growth. We get to those 2-3% growth rates, even 4%, to get some recovery from a low base. You have a lot of issues around, budgets, etc., being alleviated. You grow at 4-5% a year. You're getting so much more money a year that the budget deficit doesn't matter as much. So let's just say go from 0.8, 1% where we are right now, up to 2.5-3% where we should probably be considering our fundamentals. And I think longer term that really changes the outlook for South Africa.
Do you think there'll be a change? Moodys is expected to make an announcement at some point very soon.
Yeah.
Do you think there will be a change, a positive change for South Africa's
There will be a
economy?
positive change. I mean, the best we can hope for is a delay in a downgrade and maybe postpone it indefinitely. There's no chance, I think, that we're going to see an upgrade come through from anybody at the moment. The best we can hope for is basically things staying the same, maybe a change in the outlook going forward, and then maybe down the line a change in actual ratings. But get our growth rate up to 2-3-4%. We get to 4%, even in the current economic conditions. 4% growth, exactly where we are right now. It's a totally different picture in terms of our economy and our forecast and ability to pay our debt. It would be very different for these rating agencies if we could grow at 4% as opposed to 1%.
Now, Viv, just in wrapping up very quickly, what are you expecting to come out and what would you ideally like to see that will help the economy of South Africa grow and develop to what, as you say, 3-4% growth?
Well, look, a couple of things is how he's going to handle taxes. That deficit, that hole has to be basically fixed in some way. But that is probably the best way to do it economically, but it's very difficult to do politically. As you mentioned, it's going to be really regressive. Income tax difficult to do. I hope it does not, or they don't put a wealth tax in place, because wealth taxes will not raise more revenue. They will not have any impact on the budget deficit, but it will be very negative for the growth rate of the economy, because what happens then is those with capital. And capital, by the way, is one of the fastest moving things in the world, because you can always change your capital from anything to anything else. Buy a painting. Suddenly your wealth is in the painting. How do you tax the painting? How do you tax that kind of stuff? So it becomes very difficult to determine. And what you will have is people hiding their capital in non-productive assets because they don't have to be seen. They can be hidden under a blanket somewhere. And that will be negative for the economy, and it will just be a political stunt. Also, what's going to happen to the state-owned enterprises? What are the forecasts for that? And finally, what are they going to do about some of the promises that the previous president has made regarding, for instance, free education? Are they going to deflate? And also national health insurance as well, very important to consider.
Viv, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for now. That was Viv Govender, and he is the chief economist at Rand Swiss, and he gave us a possible scenario in tomorrow's budget speech by Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba.